Okay, so I'm going to be the moderator for this room. My name is Fuzia and I'm a language teacher at Bin Sultan University. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Ross Thorburn. Have I pronounced your name
You did.
correctly with his
Congratulations.
presentation? Thank you. With his presentation about getting young learners to communicate online. Ross Thorborn is a teacher trained based in Shanghai. He started teaching in 2006. Since then, he has worked as a materials developer, director of studies, and head of education for an online school with 10,000 teachers. Ross holds a Trinity Diploma in TESL, a Trinity Fellowship Diploma in TESL Education Studies, and an International Diploma in Language Teaching Management from the University of Queensland, and a Master's degree in Language Education with Nile. He's also the host of TEFL Training Institute podcast. Welcome to the session, Ross, and you can share. Yeah, you're already sharing your screen. Okay, thank you so much. You can begin now.
Sure, sure, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for the for the introduction there. So, hi everyone. As you heard, my name's Ross. So this afternoon, I'm going to be talking about engagement and communication in online classes. So, as you just heard, I started teaching back in 2006. I didn't have a picture of me then, but this is a picture of me with a little bit more hair than I have today. Back, I think this was in 2008. So I was teaching kids. And then after that, I became a director of studies. I did that for a couple of years. After that, I became a teacher trainer and did that full time for about 5 years. And then about 3, 4 years ago, I ended up moving to an online school. So this is me with some of my colleagues in that online school. And it was very, very different to what I've been doing before face to face. So obviously it was online. We had 10,000 teachers, which, was obviously a huge scale. And this team that you can see here, these guys were responsible for observing all these teachers. As you can see, there's not very many of them. So that was a huge challenge. And we also, these teachers all came from a real variety of different backgrounds. We had some teachers who'd graduated from Ivy League colleges. We had teachers who had previous experience teaching in primary schools. And we also had a lot of teachers who just never taught before. So a lot of variety there, and a huge number of students as well, about 100,000 students in that school. So this is what our classes or our classrooms looked like. So you can see in the top left corner, there's a teacher. In the bottom left, there is a student, and the materials are on the right hand side. So the first thing that I thought was really interesting about this is just how big the materials were. I'm not sure if this is the case for you guys, but at least I think in this presentation, the materials take up the majority of space on the screen, as they did in my school. And interestingly there, you couldn't really turn the materials off. They were always on. And a lot of the materials that we used were actually from offline course books. So here's an example. So from an offline course book, but this was moved online. So look and say, and I guess maybe also write, maybe not very ideal for online. Here's another example of an activity taken from an offline class. This is an invitation to a birthday party. We'll look at this in more detail later on, but obviously a lot of writing here, which is maybe quite difficult to do online. And then a lot of the interactions online that I heard when I was observing classes looked something like this. So here is a teacher talking to a student. So the teacher in this role play has said, so you've got to say, is there a clothes shop? And the teacher has, and the student said, is there a clothes shop? Yes, there is. You can buy a coat. And the teacher says, student says, on the first floor. Is there a gift shop? Yes, there is. So a lot of these interactions to me didn't really look to be very communicative. That was another thing that struck me about being online compared to offline. But another fascinating thing I noticed about working online was that we could observe people without them seeing us. So when I was a teacher trainer and also when I was a director of studies, when I went to observe teachers, I think the first thing that happens is teachers are probably nervous. Teachers aren't used to being observed, or we don't get observed very often. So as soon as someone else walks into the room, I think that changes how we behave. But a fascinating thing about online teaching is it's possible to access, usually, the recordings of what has transpired in the classes and evaluate those, or analyze those afterwards. So that means that you can see real behavior without what's often called the observer's paradox. So the paradox is that you want to observe people behaving naturally, but usually when you observe, they don't behave naturally. But online, that isn't a problem. So these were a lot of my initial reflections about working online. I heard in the forum earlier someone asking, is online better or worse than offline? And I think Hugh also commented on this. Well, here were some of the disadvantages. I thought that often there was not very much communication happening. The materials tended to dominate a lot of the classroom interactions. And a lot of those materials as well tended to come from offline course books. So they maybe weren't very ideal for online. But there were some advantages as well. Huge opportunity to observe, a big variety of teachers, and also a chance to test out activities, right? For anyone who's ever worked making materials before, you know that if you write a new course book and you roll it out, it probably takes, I don't know, a period of probably 2 or 3 years to introduce a new course book. But online, sometimes we were able to introduce or change activities in classes just in a few hours. So big opportunities to test out activities. So around this time, I also signed up to do an MA course at Nile, which I'm doing I don't get paid anything for this, but a quick plug because I really enjoyed the course. So as my dissertation, I decided to investigate some of these questions in a bit more detail. So the questions I was interested in investigating were: what communication actually happens in online language classes? Do the materials and the course books affect this communication? And how can teachers get students to communicate even more? All right, so that all leads us to what we're looking at today. So hopefully today we're just going to look at just 4 things. So first of all is, what is communication? What does it mean? I think we often hear the term communicative language teaching being used, but what does it actually mean? How could we describe that? Do activities and materials impact communication? Well, I suppose obviously they do, but to what extent do they? What can teachers do to encourage more communication in their online classes? And at the end, some final thoughts and hopefully questions from all of you. So let's start off looking at what is communication. So what is it? What does it look like? Or what does it sound like? I found it was very difficult to actually come up with one single definition of what meaningful communication is. But a way to analyze this, which I really liked, involved looking at context and meaning. So you can see this has matrix, I guess you call it. There's 4 quadrants. So this is based on something quite old from 1975. But the idea is that we can look at what communication happens in terms of how much context there is and how much meaning there is. So let's start off in the bottom left-hand corner here. And this would be what I think gets called mechanical drill practice. So there's no context and no communication. So this would be like a typical drill here. So we've got the teacher saying, "I like cats," and the students repeat, "I like cats." The teacher says, "I like dogs," and the students say, "I like dogs." So there's no context here and there's no communication. So this is definitely not very meaningful. The second thing we've got is situational grammar practice. So something where there is some context, but maybe not so much meaning. So here's an example of what you might sometimes hear in class, a student-to-student role play, maybe in a supermarket. So one student might say to the other, "I'd like some bread." The other student who's playing the shopkeeper role might say, "That's $1, please." The other person says, "Here you are," and they say, "Thank you." So that's an example of something where there is a clear context. We've got roles, the students are in a shop, someone's buying something, but there's not very much meaning. It's not very real what's going on there. All right, now let's look at the bottom right-hand corner. So this is called pseudo communication. So there's some meaning, but not very much context. So here's an example of what I think is like pseudo communication in a classroom. So the teacher asks a student, "Do you have any pets?" And this student has said, "Yes, I have a dog." And the teacher replies, "Very good." Now, this is why have I called this pseudo communication? Well, there is some meaning, right? This teacher has asked a genuine question, right? The teacher does not know, I guess, if this student has a dog or not. So that's a real question, sometimes called a referential question. And the students replied, "Yes, I have a dog." So there's some real meaning being communicated there. But afterwards, the teacher said, "Very good." Now, if you asked one of your friends if they had a pet dog or if they had a pet, and they said, "Yes, I have a dog," it's highly unlikely you would reply, "Very good." You might say, "Oh, is it a big dog or a small dog?" Or, "Oh, how long have you had a dog for?" Or, do you recommend I get a dog?" There'd be some context around it. But here, often in the classroom, when teachers ask these questions, we end up with a pseudo communication. So we react in a way that wouldn't happen in the real world. So this is also sometimes called IRF, initiation. So the teacher asks a question like, "Do you have any pets?" The student responds, "Yes, I have a dog." And the teacher, instead of responding in a genuine way, gives some feedback. So very often they'll say something like, "Very good." Okay, so that was pseudo communication. And then the last one is real communication. So where there is meaning and context. So here's an example, I guess, a real classroom interaction. "Please help checking my writing." So the student has actually asked for help, and the teacher or another student has said, "Sure, I think you spelled this wrong." So there's a context because the student really wants help, and something real has been communicated there. So those are kind of the conditions for how communication can take place. Let's look at how students can communicate very briefly. So students, of course, can communicate with almost no speech at all, right? It might be possible for students just to communicate using gestures, right? They could nod, shake their head, facial expressions. Of course, teachers could ask genuine questions and just get a very simple yes or no response from students. Not very complex speech, but something real could be communicated. Students could use previously learned language to communicate, maybe a little bit more complex, but not very much. They might use the target language from a lesson. So for example, if you're teaching a PPP lesson, maybe the language you've introduced in the earlier stages, the students might use that to communicate. Students might use pushed output, where they're trying to communicate something that's a little bit beyond what they're able to do. So they're kind of stretching themselves out of their linguistic comfort zones. And something might happen where I think Hugh talked about this earlier in the last hour, where communication breaks down and then we get negotiation of meaning. So I didn't understand what you said. Could you say that again, please? Right? Oh, what do you mean? Right. So that would be from less to more complex speech. All right, so let's go on to look at like activities and materials and how these impact communication in online classes. I'll show you really quickly some, so basically for this research, I looked at 4 different online activities. So here they are. This is a first one. This is where the students need to fill out this invitation card. They need to invite someone to their birthday party. So we've got the student's name at the top right, that's who it's from. 2, I guess, is the friend's name, and you've got the date of the birthday party, which I guess has to be the student's birthday. That's the first activity. The second one here is a role play, so kind of like information gap, but in this case, both the teacher and the student can see this. So we've got a shopping mall on the left, and we've got some sentence stems on the right. So the teacher would ask the student, "Hi, I want to buy a coat. Is there a clothes shop?" And then the student has to give some directions to the teacher. So the third one is designing a shopping center with your teacher. So the teacher has to type and the student has to tell them what to type. So we've got this blank shopping mall plan. So that's something creative. And then finally here we have a listing task where the student has to talk about what foods they like to eat on different days of the week. So I thought at this point I could ask you all to write uh, which of these four activities was the most effective at getting students to communicate? What do you think? So Melanie, the book here actually, since you asked, I think was Primary Longman Express was where a lot of these materials were from. But can anyone guess which of these four activities do you think was the most effective? So Morax thinks the third one. I've got a feeling Morax has seen this presentation before. Anyone else? What do you think? Was it the birthday party, the role play? Burat thinks the fourth one about the food. Rosemary also thinks the one with the food. Okay, great. Melanie also thinks that. So we'll find out. So let's look at some examples. But before, so just to keep you all engaged, we'll look at that last. But first of all, we're going to look at some examples of teachers and students interacting and what teachers can do to encourage communication. So the first example I wanted to show you all is, oh, sorry, before that, who was in the study? So we had 17 teachers and students, pairs. The teachers were from the US, the UK, and South Africa. They were mostly female, and most of them did not have a recognized TEFL qualification. The students were all Chinese. About 2/3 of them were male, a third female. They were mainly primary school aged, and for anyone in China, they were distributed pretty evenly between tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 cities. All right, so let's look at what some things that teachers can do to promote meaningful communication online. So let's look at this first task that a few of you thought would be very useful for encouraging genuine communication. So we have the favorite food list. So here's an example of that. So this teacher starts off by saying, so we're halfway through the conversation here. So this teacher said, what about today? What did you eat for breakfast today? So the teacher underlines Saturday. Student says, tomato soup. Tomato soup. Ah, do you know what the teacher ate for breakfast today? No. Cake. It was. I ate cake. Today is my birthday. Today's my birthday, so I ate cake. What will you eat tomorrow? Tomorrow is Sunday. What will you eat? And this student, I think very interestingly, says, mushroom. I don't know about you, but when I see mushroom, I think, well, I don't really understand what that is. But the teacher then says, mushrooms. Okay. What did you eat for lunch on Tuesday? Tell me, what did you eat for lunch? Pizza. Oh, yum, pizza. I like pizza. What about Wednesday? Chicken. Good. You eating some good lunch. Chicken. Yes. What about Thursday? And the student says, tomato. So I think this sounds very like that pseudo communication that we saw earlier, where the student's saying something real, but the way the teacher responds to it is not very real, right? If you ask one of your friends, what did you eat for lunch? And they said mushroom, you'd probably say like, what? You ate a mushroom for lunch? Like what, a giant mushroom? Was it big? Or if someone said, I eat pizza, yeah, you might say, oh, what kind of pizza? But anyway, that's not really happening here. Okay, and let's compare that to another task. So this is the one we also looked at earlier. So this is where the teacher and the student have to design a shopping mall together. So this teacher is asking the student and has made a suggestion. So they've said, what about a Minnie Mouse? And then the student has started to draw in. So I don't know if you can see here on the top floor, the student starts to draw more lines. And she starts counting 1, 2, 3. So she's adding more shops to the shopping center. And the teacher says, you want more shops? And the student says, and dancing. And the teacher tries to clarify this and says, a dancing shop. And the student says, oh, dancing. Oh, and then says something in her first language. When the teacher makes a suggestion, a dance school. And the student says, no, no, dancing school. And the teacher sort of corrects that. Dance school, dance school. Okay, very good, very nice. And the teacher is now trying to bring this activity to an end. I like the shopping center. Do you like it? And the student then says, yes. And sing school. And the teacher says, singing school. Okay. So you can see here a lot's going on, right? So at the beginning, the student starts to take control of the communication by adding more things into the shopping center. She starts to say some things that are beyond her current level of language. So she's not really able to describe dance school at the beginning. So she attempts that. This teacher reformulates, and we get some sort of pushed output, and then the student ends up reformulating what she says. All right. So this is one of my first principles, I would say, for encouraging meaningful communication is ask questions you want to know the answers to. You can see that first teacher there asking about the food didn't really seem to be very interested in the answers, probably because, she might not understand what Chinese kids are eating for lunch anyway. But the second one, the teacher really did have to understand the student because that teacher had to fill out that model for the shopping center. All right, so let's look at another example here. This is the shopping center design task again with another teacher and student. So this time, this teacher, different teacher, asks the student to fill in the design herself. So this teacher ignores the advice on the side that says, student says, and the teacher types. So she says to the student, you can write in the names of the shop yourself. So the student writes all these things in herself, and then this takes about 4 or 5 minutes. And then on line 7, the teacher says, excellent, well done, really good job, well done. And then starts asking questions. So what is on the second floor? What is on the second floor? And the student says, a clothes shop and a sportswear shop. Okay, what's on the ground floor? Is a sweet shop. And what is on the third floor? A toy shop and a bookshop. So you can see here that because the teacher and the student can all see the same information, we keep getting these display questions. So they're not real questions, they're questions for the student to display their own, language knowledge. And so not very much communication is happening. So that's with the student controlling the pen. Here's another example, different student, different teacher, but the teacher has controlled the pen themselves instead of the student. So the teacher also does a lot more. They're a lot more active than the previous teacher. So this teacher also starts filling in some information herself. So she says, ground floor, we're going to have a dog shop. And the student says, a dog shop. Okay. The teacher says, yeah, dog food, dog everything, dog games, dog place to play if it's raining, dog shop, dog gym. Ha ha ha, a dog gym. And then the student draws something on the screen that looks like a number 8 or an infinity sign. And the teacher, I think, assumes that this is a bone, right? Like a bone that a dog might want to chew on. And the teacher says, another dog shop? No, no, no. We can only have one dog shop, one big dog shop. And then the student says, it's a candy shop. And the teacher mishears, oh, a cat shop. Okay. And the student says, candy shop. This is candy. And the teacher says, okay, all right. So we've got dogs, we've got candy. So you can see here in this activity, the student interrupts to take over from the teacher. They interrupt again, it's a candy shop, and they have to interrupt the teacher a third time. So really different to what we saw earlier, where the student's taking a lot of control, and eventually it results in some understanding. So you can
Sorry
see
to
here that,
interrupt, Ross. You have five
yes,
more minutes. Thank you.
great. Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
That's all right. So you can see here that we've got getting the students to instruct and the teachers to draw. You've got this real communication that's going on, right? Whereas if the student just has to draw something themselves, that doesn't happen so much. All right. So 2 more questions. We're going to look at where should we put communicative activities and lessons, and do sentence stems actually help students to communicate? So let's look at the sentence stems first. We've got this shopping mall again, sentence stems on the right on a shopping list. So the teacher is going to ask the students to where they can buy different things in this mall. And we've got those sentence stems at the top. Okay, so here is this activity with sentence stems. So we've got the teacher saying, so you've got to say, is there a clothes shop? And the student says, is there a clothes shop? Yes, there is. You can buy a coat. And the teacher says, on the, and the student says, on the first floor. Teacher, is there a gift shop? Student, yes, there is. You can buy a present on the first floor. And the teacher, is there a bookshop? The student, yes, there is. You can buy, etc., etc. So you can see here that what we've really got is this initiation, response, initiation, response, initiation, response. So it doesn't really look anything like a real interaction. So although I presumably, when my team were making these materials, we all thought, oh, this is great, right? We're giving the students lots of help. Actually, I think these sentence stems tend to result in this very kind of stiff interaction. But this weekly food list, on the other hand, that a few of you liked earlier, very different, right? So with this one, here's this student being asked by the teacher what they ate. So the student starts off by saying, today I have milk and stampan. And the student says, I'm sorry. Teacher says, I'm sorry. Student says, some negotiation of meaning there. So I would say if you want to encourage real communication in your classes, avoid having those sentence stems. All right, final example here. This invitation card that I think none of you originally picked. So this is my interesting interaction. So this is from the end of the class. So we've got the teacher asks the student, and they're in a rush, kind of like how I am now with this presentation. And the teacher says to the student, oh, just put today's date, the 10th of the 10th, 2019. Where's your house, right? So the teacher basically chooses the student's birthday for them in this example. So the teacher doesn't really bother asking the student anything real. And later on, the teacher tells the student what to say. Okay, say exit one, and the student says exit one. So that's what happens when you put this communicative activity at the end of class. And I found this happened a lot. The most important activities got left out because they were at the end. Whereas here's a teacher who did the same activity at the beginning, and the teacher has so much more communication in here. So,
Ross, we can't see your presentation.
oh,
Hello,
Yeah,
sorry,
not
there's a
sharing.
technical issue, so please, moderator, start from where we left off. Thank you.
oh
The
dear.
last slide, I guess.
Okay. Oh, let's see. All right, let's.
Sorry, Ross, you can continue your presentation.
Yeah, sure. I'm gonna try and
There was
share
a
this.
technical glitch. Yeah.
Yeah, that's all right. So can you guys see this now from the start of class?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So basically this is from the beginning of a class. It's much more communicative. You can see the student ends up taking a lot of control, and there's a lot of negotiation of meaning that goes on, right? So even though there's not very much speaking, there's a huge amount of communication. So I would say it's very important, or not very important, but I found that when activities, communicative activities got put at the end of lessons rather than at the beginning, then you ended up with much less communication happening. When you put the communicative activities at the start, actually teachers were able to do those in a much more relaxed way. Hugh was talking about this earlier, how it's important for teachers to be relaxed, be in the right frame of mind, and that's when a lot of real communication takes place. So just to go back to this from the beginning, there we saw some different examples, right, of how the role play there maybe really ended up being a lot of situational grammar practice. Is there a bookshop? Yes, there is. You can buy it on the fourth floor. So there's some context, but maybe not very much meaning. We had a bit of pseudo communication. Tomorrow's Sunday. What will you eat? Mushroom? Mushrooms. Okay. And then finally, we also got some real communication as well. More shops and dancing and a dance shop, etc., etc. Okay, and then just finally, so to show you the results, I asked you at the beginning which of these you thought would be the most communicative. And actually the one that ended up being the most communicative by quite a long way was the shopping center design activity. So that ended up resulting in a lot more communication than the others. So just to wrap up, ask questions you want to know the answers to from your students. Principle 2, get students to tell you what to do or what to draw. Principle 3, avoid sentence stems. I'm not saying always, but if you want communication to happen, avoid those. And number 4, put the most important activities at the beginning of the lessons. All right. Sorry about that. I think I ran 1 minute over. I hope you'll forgive me.
Thank you.
If there's any questions, this is your
Ross,
time.
very nice, very interactive session. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions, you can ask your questions now. You can either unmute yourself or you can put the questions in the chat box. Thank you. Any questions, ladies and gentlemen? Any questions? Okay.
May I ask a question?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thanks for presenting.
Your voice is not clear, Dr. Hussain. Could you?
Is it clear now?
No, we still need a little bit louder.
Okay. In the presentation, we see the role playing in the classroom. The communication is pseudo communication, and some examples shows there is no communication at all or meaningful communication. That examples reflect that this is the learning process. While we are teaching or learning foreign language, this is the process, this is the methods. But if it is so, so what will be the new strategy, new method that can be applied instead of this role playing that reflecting the no communication at all or pseudo communication? So what is the message that we can add new dimension in our teaching method? Thanks for, I'm waiting for your answer.
Great. Yeah, so interesting point, right? So maybe it's the case that some of those activities, even if there wasn't very much communication, that's just a natural part of the learning process. So I guess some people would say that maybe that you need to be able to practice things first before you can communicate. I guess another point of view might be that if you encourage the students to say something that they really want to say, then that's when learning actually happens. That a lot of classroom interactions, like maybe learning doesn't occur in those, is because just the students are not very interested in them. And yeah, I mean, I think you could make both of those arguments. Again, I'm not saying that any of these activities were terrible. I just think it's interesting to think about which of these actually encourage communication. So certainly that role play, it was very useful in getting students to practice some language structures, if that's what the teachers wanted to do, but it certainly didn't really result in very much communication.
Thank you. Any more questions?
Okay, hi, can I ask a question?
Of course.
Okay, sorry to interrupt your drinking. Okay, I teach English here in Algeria, but we're still dealing with the normal teaching. It means classroom, divide into section, okay, each student in one table, a little bit far from each other. But we didn't start yet dealing with the new normal teaching, I mean the hybrid teaching. I wish you guide me because I want someone to encourage me to launch this kind of new normal teaching using, for example, synchronous and asynchronous softwares just like Zoom and Google Classroom. If you advise me, for example, I launch videos in YouTube and things alike. I'm a little bit disturbed. I don't know. Okay, theoretically, I know these things. Okay, Google Meet, Team, Microsoft Team. Okay, but I didn't start yet dealing with this kind of teaching. What can you say to help me, for example?
Sure. So maybe just 2 or 3 tips. One thing that Jake mentioned
Okay,
earlier.
sorry to interrupt you. Sorry to interrupt you. I work in a public school. It's not private. Okay, the state paid me for the job that I do at school. Okay, not out school, but I want to have this experience. Okay, I know that the next decades maybe we'll have more pandemics and things alike. So I I hope that I'm going to be prepared for those days. Okay. I wish that they are not going to be dark days, pink days. Okay.
Yeah, me too.
So,
Yeah.
inshallah, yes.
Sure. So a couple of, I guess, things related to what we talked about today. So one thing Jake mentioned earlier in the panel discussion is that online's a great way, obviously, and it has been for a long time, to flip the classroom, get students to do a lot of the learning in advance. And I think that links to what I was saying earlier, that you can put your communicative or more meaningful activities at the beginning of a lesson if you're getting students to do a lot of learning online before the classes. So I'd say that that's one thing. And then another tip I would say, just from teaching online in general, is that one of the nice things about it is that we're able to do these classes where we're kind of in each other's homes. And that means that all of a sudden there's a huge opportunity to get students to personalize language so much more. So very often in face-to-face classes, students are all wearing the same uniforms, they all have the same books, they're all sitting at the same desks. There's not very much individualism, I guess, in the classroom. But as soon as everyone's online, there's all these amazing opportunities to get students to personalize things. So if we're talking about books, okay, go and find your favorite book from your room and introduce it to the class. Or if we're talking about clothes, it's very boring online, face to face, because maybe all our students in a public school are wearing the same uniform. But of course, online, go to your wardrobe, find your favorite clothes, bring them back, describe one of your classmates' favorite clothes, tell us about that. Or food, go to the fridge or the freezer, bring one of your favorite snacks and introduce it to the class. So I think the nice thing about being online is that there's all these opportunities to get students to bring things in from the real world around them, and it's very, very difficult to do that face to face.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Ross, for your very insightful presentation. So if you could share your email in case people
Oh
want
yes, absolutely, yeah.
have more
Absolutely.
questions. We'll just
So
have to limit the questions.
that's the
here.
website. If you're interested in more stuff from me, www.tefltraininginstitute.com. We also have interviews there with some of the other people from today. Jake Whidden is on there. I've got interviews with Hugh Deller as well. If you like him as well, you can find an interview I did with Hugh on there. Or if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, that's my LinkedIn address. And if you just want to reach out via email, or you want this presentation or anything like that, then send an email to me, ross.thorburn@yahoo.com.
Thank you, Ross. Thank you for your time. I truly appreciate
You're
it.
welcome.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Cheers, you too.
Bye.